Look out at any major intersection today, and you'll see a world built for internal combustion. But roll the clock back just 150 years. The steel and gasoline fades away, replaced entirely by a living, breathing, biological machine. We underestimate just how completely the 19th century relied on the horse. This sea of traffic inching across London Bridge represents the standard daily commute. Commerce, agriculture, and daily movement depended entirely on millions of animals pulling heavy loads day in and day out. The legal system, however, categorized these living engines simply as property. Socially and legally, a horse was treated no differently than a wagon wheel or a steam pipe, an object to be used until it broke. This strict utilitarian mindset led to staggering levels of systemic overwork, exhaustion, and daily abuse. Early animal welfare advocates tried to intervene. They published mortality statistics, delivered impassioned lectures, and presented logical arguments, but they failed to overcome public apathy because people didn't care enough about the suffering of property to change their daily habits. To force actual legal and social change, activists realized they couldn't rely on data alone. They needed to bypass the intellect and target the public's emotions. Society had to feel the weight of the whip before voting to ban it. Take a look at this cover of Anna Sewell's Black Beauty. While modern audiences often treat it as a gentle children's bedtime story, its original publication in 1877 served a completely different purpose. It was designed as a calculated piece of political technology. Sewell's intervention traded the logic of the lecture hall for the visceral intimacy of a life lived in the harness. Her strategy relied on forced perspective. By writing an autobiography from the point of view of the horse, giving the animal a distinct voice, memories, and a rich internal life, she forced wealthy, resistant readers to mentally strap themselves into the harness. Once she had them trapped in that perspective, she targeted Victorian high society's obsession with aesthetics, specifically a device known as the bearing rein. This diagram shows how the mechanism actually worked. The bearing rein was a strap designed to force the horse's neck into a high, severe arch. Wealthy owners considered this fashionable, but pulling the head back this far caused massive tension, crushing the spinal column and severely restricting the animal's airway while they tried to pull heavy carriages. Sewell used her first-person narrative to describe this suffocating pain from the inside out. When her upper-class readers experienced the choking and the sharp cramps through the eyes of the narrator, they lost their plausible deniability. They could no longer claim ignorance about the physical cost of their fashion. But she didn't stop at intentional cruelty. Sewell also dedicated entire chapters to showing how simple ignorance was just as lethal. She mapped out exactly how well-meaning handlers who provided improper food, dark stables, and poor grooming were slowly killing their animals without realizing it. By translating abstract welfare concepts into immediate, visceral suffering through a character her readers had grown to love, Sewell effectively slipped past the intellectual defenses of the Victorian public. The narrative then shifts away from the vanity of the wealthy, turning its lens onto the brutal labor economics of the working class. Here, we see the specific target of her economic critique, the urban cab horse. These animals were hitched alone to heavy, hansom cabs, tasked with hauling passengers across miles of unforgiving cobblestone streets, 7 days a week. The novel details the underlying economic trap driving this labor. Cab drivers operated under punishing quota systems and predatory daily rental fees. To make enough money to survive the week, a driver practically had to overwork his horse to the point of collapse. Notice what Sewell does here. She refuses to villainize the poor cabbies. Instead, her narrative indicts the broader economic structure that forced desperate men into a terrible choice: starve your own children or break your horse. True animal welfare reform, the book argues, is impossible if you ignore the labor economics of the human beings forced to wield the whip. The public's reaction to the novel was immediate. It became a massive bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic, proving that Sewell's emotional strategy worked. Early animal rights advocates purchased millions of copies, launching an aggressive distribution campaign. They handed them out directly to stable hands, cab drivers, and resistant lawmakers to ensure the message penetrated every level of society. The fallout resulted in direct, tangible legislative victories. The intense public shaming generated by the book led to the eventual abolition of the bearing rein, and society poured massive new funding into organized humane societies. You can see the resulting shift in community action right here in this photograph. Institutions like the Washington Animal Rescue League, hosting free horse dinners for working animals, showcase a transition from public apathy to organized, localized intervention. When we evaluate Black Beauty today, we need to correct the record. It endures as a highly effective political tool for societal intervention, carefully disguised as a novel. Ultimately, the novel's legacy is found in how it pushed society to expand the reach of human empathy, to protect those who cannot speak for themselves.